I hope you understand the idea of the Christian reading of the Bible. We said that for the Christian, we see the Bible as centered on Christ. The unity of the Bible is in its pointing to Christ. Again, I will repeat, pointing to Christ. The prophets of the Old Testament were pointing to Christ. Moses in the Old Testament was pointing to Christ. The history of Israel in the Old Testament was leading to Christ. So all of that were leading to Christ. And so when we come to the New Testament, we find the summit of all that movement. We find the conclusion of all that movement. We find the conclusion and unity of the whole movement of the Bible towards Christ. Again, I will repeat, this is a Christian reading of the Bible. It is how we look at the Bible in terms of our Christian faith. However, if we have to study the Bible in a more scientific way, we will have to take another position. Let us not forget that the Bible is a set of books written by human authors. And these human authors have had an experience of God. And so they wrote the different books of the Bible using their language, using their ways of thinking, using their ways of culture. Even the personalities of the authors influenced the writing of the biblical books. Even if they talk about God and they have an experience of God, they still try to understand that experience with God. So as they wrote the books of the Bible, they were still using and following their own human ways of thinking and writing. The Bible is not like the Quran of the Muslims. The Muslims believe that the Quran was dictated word by word by God to the Prophet Muhammad. And so the Prophet Muhammad was not making a text. He was just following the dictates of God. That is not how we understand our Bible. Our Bible was still written by human hands, inspired by God. So if we have to study the Bible, and we will study the Bible in a more scientific way, this aspect of the human element in the Bible must not be set aside. To study the Bible, we also need to know the meaning that the authors wanted to put in the books that they wrote. And to go and understand that meaning that the authors wanted to put in their books, we will have to study the conditions of the authors, the conditions of the writing of the books, the history in the writing of the books. Notice that this is very different from what we said as the Christian reading of the Bible. In the scientific reading of the Bible, we try to understand a book in the Bible through looking at the meaning that the author of that book wanted to put in writing. Now, when the author was writing, the author did not necessarily know Jesus Christ. So we cannot apply immediately the Christian reading in the understanding of the book of that author. We cannot immediately conclude that the author was thinking of Jesus Christ. We cannot immediately conclude that the author was thinking of Jesus Christ and that his book will be leading to Jesus Christ. That was not in the mind of the author. Let us look at one example. This example is the Emmanuel of Isaiah. In the Christian reading of the book of Isaiah, where we read the story of the prophecy about Emmanuel, if we read that from a Christian perspective, we will say that the Emmanuel was about Jesus Christ. We will say that the Emmanuel of the Old Testament in Isaiah was already pointing to Jesus Christ. That is a Christian reading of Isaiah. However, if we have to do a scientific biblical understanding of Emmanuel in the book of Isaiah, we will have to suspend our Christian reading. We will have to bracket our Christian reading for a while and then try to understand the meaning that the author of the book of Isaiah wanted to say about Emmanuel. The author of the book of Isaiah, writing about Emmanuel, was not thinking of Jesus Christ. He did not know Jesus Christ. He was many centuries before Jesus Christ. So he cannot write about Jesus Christ. So he had a specific meaning and specific understanding in his use of the name Emmanuel. When we do biblical scientific study, we will have to understand what the author wanted to say in the book that he wrote. Later on, after our scientific biblical study, we can move into the Christian reading of the book. So let us not mix the two. Let us not try to put together the Christian reading of the Bible and the scientific reading study of the Bible. We need to do this in order to be objective. We need to do this in order to be clear also with what biblical authors wanted to really say in their books. Okay, so let us just be aware of the difference between doing a biblical scientific study of the Bible and a Christian reading of the Bible. They do not necessarily contradict each other, but each of them has a specific area of study, specific area of understanding. Let us be aware and conscious of this. So, for example, if we read Isaiah and we want to study Isaiah biblically, scientifically, we have to suspend for a moment our Christian reading of that book. We need to suspend, set aside our Christian understanding of that book. We need to see what the author himself may have been trying to say in what he wrote. So let us be aware of this.